everyone, and welcome to another episode of Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. It's been a pretty crazy time the last few weeks. It's been exciting, kind of a lot of things happening in Boston sports. The other day, we had some kind of sad news come out of Boston sports with Julian Edelman officially retiring, which is definitely weird for Patriots fans like me. I don't think we're ever going to find another player as special as him, and just his character and his leadership style and just the way he played the game, I think, is just something that is hard to find. And obviously, you know, with just everything that he did for the Patriots, especially in a lot of their playoff runs, I think he's really going to be missed among Patriots fans. So that happened. And speaking of, you know, Julian Edelman retiring and just reactions to that, I'm excited to announce my guest that I have with me this evening. He works at 98.5, the flagship radio station for Boston sports. So that's pretty exciting. His name is Tyler Milliken. Tyler, how are you?
I'm good. Can't complain. You know, coming off, we have a doubleheader going on with the Red Sox today, and Alex Verdugo just made a pretty special catch to end it. So I got a smile on my face.
Yeah, no, that was pretty incredible watching him do that. It almost reminded me of that Benny 2018 ALCS catch. It was almost an exact replica of that catch, except maybe even a little better.
No, honestly, that's exactly how I saw it. Like, Benny's catch was special, and you have the moment and everything that obviously make it even crazier. But ball off the bat, I had my head in my hand. So I was like, oh, you know, we're back to Matt Barnes 2020 here.
Yeah, I know. Once he came into the game, I was like, you know, he's had solid stuff so far this year. So I can't help but feel optimistic about how this inning is going to go. And then, you know, he gave up a base runner, and I was like, oh my gosh, like in this situation, like you can't be giving up base runners like that when we're only up by 1 run. And just the amount of runners that were stranded on bases by the Red Sox in that game too. It was one of those things where I was like, yeah, if this is going to be a win, it's going to be an ugly one, but I'll take it if we can get to it. But Barnes was making me so nervous after he gave up that base runner. And then, like you said, as soon as that ball was hit, I really thought it was going to drop and the tying run was going to come in.
Yeah, and then there was a Miguel Sano, you know, almost double down the left field line. Just way too many moments. And on a day where it's like, you know, you got another 7 innings you got to play here. Last thing you want, especially with them being able to keep this pitching staff pretty, you know, fresh throughout the year so far.
Exactly. Yeah, that scared me. That almost gave me a heart attack too. And then when it barely dropped foul, I was like, oh my gosh, thank God. I was like, that would have been so scary to see that happen too. That was one of those games where it was just a nail biter until the very end.
100%. And, you know, listen, when you start to get to the point where you're winning 8 straight, you're going to get some games like this. So I'll take it any way they can get it right now. Stack these early wins because it sets the tone for the rest of the year.
Exactly. And I totally agree. And, you know, there's a lot of people on social media saying like, you know, it's only 8 games in. Like, let's see what they do the rest of the season. Like, let's not jump to conclusions now, which in a way I agree with that because, you know, there's still so much more baseball to be played. But at the same time, I agree with that to an extent in terms of like, yeah, a lot can obviously happen for the rest of the season. But with the way that they're playing right now, it's important to be able to set that tone early. Because if you get a really, really rough start and lose a bunch of games in a row at the beginning of the season, it's harder to get that momentum to start winning games later on. So I feel like now that they're setting the tone now and kind of sending that message to everybody in the AL East, like, hello, we're here and we're competing. I think that that's a really good sign for how the rest of the season is going to go.
100% agree. And I think it kind of goes on, and like you're someone who's really pushed us on Twitter as well. I understand a lot of people didn't watch last season. You know, it was a rough year, right? But a lot of people like me and you, we sat through the pain. We kind of dealt with it. You know what I mean? And just to see, you know, you entered last season with 2 starting pitchers. It was Nate Eovaldi and Martin Perez. As bad luck, you know, Chris Sale goes down, Eduardo Rodriguez goes down with myocarditis. And you have a rotation where you have, you know, 2 solid arms, Nate Eovaldi, a good mid-rotation arm, and Martin Perez, a fine number 5. But when you come into this season and you have 5 serviceable starters, how much of a difference that makes? Just, you know, you see it. We're, you know, 3 turns through the rotation almost now. Or, you know, going into the 3rd turn right now. It makes a world difference. And when you have a top 3, top 5 offense in the game, they're going to keep you in it. And it's the whole fact. Listen, the pitching's been really good so far. I think you take out Garrett Richards' blow-up start to begin the season. They entered today with like a 3.35 ERA. You know, you can't ask for much more than that. This offense just needs to be kept in the game. That's all it takes. And they're going to continue to mount comebacks and keep it close and win games.
Exactly. And that was the issue last year was, you'd have the offense that would put up the runs. And it's not like the offense was ever a concern because we know that this lineup has players that can hit. And they were hitting last year. But the problem was the bullpen would come in and blow a lot of those games where you did have the offense that was putting up the runs, but then it was just never enough because the offense there, you would see the bullpen come in and just blow these games. And that was just so frustrating to watch. And you're exactly right when you said you just have to keep the offense in these games. I mean, they'll hit and they'll do their job, most days. And you just have to have the pitching to be able to back that up and keep the run count low for other teams. And we've seen so far pretty solid starts from everybody. And then when the bullpen comes in, they're not really giving up these crazy leads either or blowing games like we saw frequently last year. I think overall so far, and I'm sure you can probably agree with this too, that going into the season, the pitching was a question mark because, Chris Sale is still going to be, we don't know how he's going to be when he returns. And then also just with everything else that they did with the pitching, and Erod was a question mark, and just Martin Perez and Tanner Houck, I wish that he would come back up, but we'll touch on that too. But I think just in general, I think the pitching was one of the biggest question marks coming into the season because I said, look, we know that we have the offense, and if this is going to be this season is going to come down to, if this is going to be a team that can contend, it's going to come down to the pitching and just staying consistent.
I 100% agree with you. And, heading in, I understand some of the concerns. Nate Eovaldi's injury history, we all know about it. Eduardo Rodriguez not throwing at all last year, right? That's definitely a scary thing to kind of consider and look at. But like we've seen, 2 times through the rotation, things have gone well. It doesn't mean things are always going to go well with this rotation. There's going to be some blow-up games. They're going to have some headaches. It's not an elite rotation. No one's pretending it is. But the fact that they've been able to start and be consistent, go deeper into games. I think last year they had 25 starts that were at least 5 innings out of 6. That's a really hard way to kind of survive. 10 of the Red Sox first games this year have all been at least 5 innings. It's a completely different world we're talking about. And there's going to be, those tough moments. But as long as we've said, it has to just be average, just be consistent. And even if things kind of continue, like if a guy goes down, Nate Eovaldi needs time, Eduardo Rodriguez needs, a little bit of a break. Like you mentioned, Tanner Houck, Connor Seabold, Garrett Whitlock in the bullpen, Matt Andriese. There's so many different options for Alex Cora to lean on here if he needs to, and Chaim Bloom. And that's not even talking about the trade deadline where they might have enough, to kind of deal one of these guys off and get a little bit more back if they want to. That's how good their depth is. And that's why I don't understand the hate around Chaim Bloom. So many people want to give it to him.
I know.
But he's built up a depth on a roster. And you look back at the 2019 Red Sox. Why did they fall off so quickly? Well, when starters struggled and it was obvious they needed help, there were no reinforcements. That's where this organization was going. Chaim Bloom has given them that base, that foundation they need to, I think, be an 84 to 81 team.
Yeah, and you definitely hit the nail on the head with that because going into this season and after all the offseason moves they made, I said, yeah, I mean, they did kind of have to rebuild the farm system in a way because there were not reinforcements, like you said, and there was just not enough depth on this team to turn to. And now in this offseason, he made it so that they have just enough where they really could contend, but they have a lot of young prospects that could come up and really make this team dangerous in the next couple of years. And I think that one of the things that I tried to preach before this season was, look, they did have a lot of pieces, and last year they just had a very, very, very weak pitching rotation and a weak bullpen, and they didn't have all of their main starters that they usually have, with Sale and Erod not even playing last season, and taking that type of stuff into consideration. I was like, yeah, this is an important thing to keep in mind here, is like you're having pitchers that are playing these games that haven't really seen the pitching time yet or gotten the experience. And I think that that's another thing people just kind of just wrote off and were like, oh yeah, the Red Sox just suck. And I think it's one of those situations where even with the Ottavino signing, I think this is a good example of this, is that when they signed him, I couldn't even believe that even happened, that the Yankees would trade him within the division. First of all, I think that was, especially to the Red Sox, I was kind of surprised because we don't usually see that. But when they acquired Ottavino, I think that in a way that might have been a move where Bloom was like, okay, this is the type of situation where if we're not in contention when we're approaching the trade deadline, maybe he's the type of player that we flip for prospects later on. And I think that could have been part of the decision to acquire him in that trade, and just kind of him being one of those players where, okay, we'll see how we do, and maybe he's the type of player that we could flip later on. But I did like that move, and I think that he is a good asset to this bullpen from what I've seen so far. I think that people are putting a little bit too much weight on his 2020 season, because I think that it's just really hard for me to put too much weight on any player when it comes to 2020, because I think that with just the season it was, and not having fans at games, and the shortened season and everything else that kind of went into it, the COVID factor and everything, and spring training like basically shutting down. And I think there's a lot of things that go into last year that makes it hard for me to really judge a pitcher or any type of player based on that. But I do think Ottavino is the type of guy that we might see in, that 7 or 8 inning role a lot, and then be that bridge pitcher to Barnes in the 9th.
Yeah, listen, that Adam Ottavino trade, if you're looking for, I agree that, if things had gone wrong and if this team is out of it come that time, he is someone they can kind of ship off. But the other thing is, the only reason the Red Sox can make a move like that is because of the financial flexibility Chaim Bloom has given them. They were able to take advantage of a Yankees team that had a bit of a crunch in terms of the luxury tax and what they were trying to do over the offseason. So they had to make a deal for him. And the other part of this, Frank Herman was part of that deal. Another young pitching prospect the Red Sox brought back to solidify that depth. And listen, no one's looking at Frank Herman and saying, this guy's the next big thing. But when you continue to take these shots in the dark to add arms, who maybe, a back of the rotation arm, or, even something you can put in the bullpen, eventually you hit on enough of them and you build that depth up. The Rays have killed it year in year. The Dodgers are another team like that. You continue to bring in these arms and work with them, you're going to find something. You'll have your hits and misses. Nobody's denying that. We saw how many they had last year, right? But even in then, they found these little, diamonds in the rough, whether it was like a Phillips Valdez or, an Austin Bryce, who the numbers weren't great, but you kind of dived into the analytical data and you could see, all right, there's something there to unlock. And, you kind of have to rock with that. And while Adam Ottavino, I feel like it's been a little up and down, the early experience with the Red Sox. If you're buying into that 2020 season, I agree. There was so much stuff going on. Yeah, JD Martinez looking lost at the plate, and he's already back to being one of the best hitters in baseball. But on top of it, Ottavino had just one really bad blow up against the Indians last year. And when you're a reliever in any season, a couple bad appearances can completely destroy your line. Make it a 60-game season, one appearance could completely make it rough for you. So I like Adam Ottavino a lot. I'm curious to see. We've seen Darwinzon Hernandez today, now 5 straight scoreless appearances out of the bullpen. I think we're going to start to see him in that 8th inning mix a little bit. And Sawamura has been really good too. There's a lot of options. And one of the biggest concerns heading into this year was they don't have a true closer. Well, Matt Barnes looks like he's growing into that role. Finally, it's about time. But he's been as lethal as anybody in baseball. He entered today with a negative FIP. This is a Aroldis Chapman type stuff we're talking about here.
And this is somebody that concerned a lot of people being in a closing role. For good reason, though, because he was the type of pitcher that wasn't really equipped to close games, and we didn't really see that out of him. So this year, when Cora came out and announced that he was going to be the closer, I was like, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go. This could be really hit or miss. We have to really see what happens here. And now we were just talking about it before. Even when he gives up a base runner, I freak out because I'm like, if Matt Barnes gives up this run, then it's going to be back to people being like, oh no, this is the Matt Barnes that we all know. But he really, I agree with you. He's really stepped it up in that role. And I think if he can consistently pitch the way that he's pitching and can generally, for the most part, be relied on in that closing spot, then they're in really good shape, because then they have so many options to come out of that bullpen to be the bridge guy to him for a lot of these games that are close like we saw today. And I think if we I think based on what we've seen so far, if we can feel confident that we're going to get that Matt Barnes to close most games, and obviously he's not going to be perfect every game, but if we can get this Matt Barnes generally for the most part, then I'd feel overall so much better about the bullpen depth, because then Alex Cora has so many options after he pulls his starters for those, 4 or 3 innings, whatever we see based on when the starter gets pulled. He has so many options that he can turn to at that point, and it's just it's exciting to kind of see how he's going to use those guys as the season goes on, and who's going to be filling what role.
100%. And I think you look at where Matt Barnes is right now, and Alex Cora has made a note to say it a few different times. And I think this is where partially him and the Red Sox pitching brass, everyone wants to laugh at the pitching development here over the past 10, 15 years. I understand it. When Clay Buchholz is your last true homegrown starter, you have the right to complain.
I understand.
Yeah, but you look at Matt Barnes, and he's attacking guys in the strike zone for the first time in a long time. And we saw it start to happen towards the end of last year. He had a rough start to 2020, but he was another guy who kind of figured it out towards the end. But how many times did we watch Matt Barnes and it was, he spike a curveball in the dirt, miss high with the fastball. We do it a couple different times. Every count was 3-2. And while we saw a little bit of that today, unfortunately, every other appearance this year, no, he's just beating guys in the zone. He believes in his stuff. You look around where the Red Sox are at right now. We've seen other guys, Nate Eovaldi, who's, kind of switching up with his pitching approach from game to game, using different breaking balls and different stuff, if he doesn't have a certain pitch that day. Martin Perez, you jump into his Baseball Savant page right now, and you can see he's generating weak contact. It's such a ridiculous rate. It's not even funny. We're talking 90 percentile and, xERA, x slugging. Whatever the Red Sox pitching brass is doing and coming together, it's working. And I have to credit that to Chaim Bloom, because it hasn't worked in years. And it's starting to look a little bit like the Race Factory.
Yeah. And, and Chaim Bloom, when he came in, the first thing that he did was trade Mookie Betts. So I think that people were just livid about that. And we're like, this guy sucks. I don't want him being involved with this team anymore. He has no championships, and this is the reason why. But now we're seeing kind of the longer term impact of some of the moves that he's made. And I also give Alex Cora credit too, because I think him being back makes a difference to this team, because this is somebody who really knows how to manage them and really genuinely is a player's coach. And I think that, last year having a lack of management and somebody that it became clear that just wasn't really in a place to be able to manage this team. I think that Alex being back was probably the best move they could have made from a management standpoint, because we know he knows the game, and the players all love working with him. And I think that that's a huge factor, because I think that there's something that he brings to this team that you don't see with a lot of other teams, in terms of the fighting through every game and approaching every single game like they're not out of it. And I think that attitude that we see kind of carry over into every game is something that Alex says to bring everybody together in that locker room. And he seems to know individually how each person can improve their game.
Yeah, you see the communication in the dugout alone. One of my favorite parts of this season has been whenever a starting pitcher comes out of the game, he's immediately over to them, arm on their shoulder, and having a real conversation. I remember Garrett Richards' second start. It started horribly. We were all, baseball Twitter was already saying it's a wrap. But he's over there and, inning to inning, he went over and talked to him. But at the end, you can see how much it meant to Garrett Richards that Alex Cora walked over, said, you're doing the right stuff here. You know what I mean? You could see the relief on his face. They had figured something out. Bobby Delbeck yesterday, he lines out to right field before we had any of the doubles, but, nice swing on the ball. Obviously, he's struggling. He was batting under 100 entering that game. Cora says, listen, you're doing the right stuff. It wasn't a hit, but you're shooting the ball the other way. That's what we need. What does Bobby Delbeck do? Shoots the ball that way 2 more times later in the game, and that's the reason they win. It's little stuff like that. And listen, I don't want to slander Ron Renicky by any means, but he was past his time last year. He's a baseball lifer, and, thank you for being a great bench coach to Alex Cora and helping him learn how to be a manager in this league. he sat Alex Verdugo on opening day last year. I hate to let's keep it a buck, right? Like you can't be doing stuff like that. And it was against the lefty. Like you're facing a lefty here. And Verdugo has reverse splits in that way. Yeah. So, it's little stuff like that where I'm like, yikes. And we see it with the bullpen management. And I don't agree with everything Alex Cora does. I love him. He was my pick to come back as manager. But just because there's certain things that you don't like, you can't ignore how great he is at connecting with these players time and time again. And overall, his decision making is above average. Well, you add all those things in, you're talking about one of the better managers in the entire sport.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, I even see people from other fan bases saying, I wish we had Alex Cora as our manager. Because like you said, yeah, he'll go over and he'll talk to people individually. And he's always encouraging to them, it seems like. And it helps the players a lot. And I think when they approach these games now, especially because they knew before the season started that people were sleeping on them because they didn't see the Red Sox as this big threat because they thought it was going to be a repeat of 2020, even though I said numerous times they've made improvements this offseason and the pitching is going to be much better than it was in 2020, and we're not going to see the same team. And I think, and already, even though it's only been 11 games or 12 after this second doubleheader, still, I think we've already seen from just how the season's progressed so far that it's already not the same team as it was in 2020. I mean, people are realizing already that this is a team that actually really can contend. And I think I like seeing everybody come out in every game and be confident in what they have and what they're doing. And even Rafael Devers, I mean, he seems to be a lot more confident defensively now too, because we know that he's had his defensive struggles, but now he's coming out there and just approaching his defensive game differently. And that's really, really key, because having him out there and making the types of plays that he's been making lately, that's going to be really important for them as the season goes on too.
Yeah, and we've kind of seen, the Alex Cora, Rafael Devers relationship. It's clicked so much. And Rafael Devers said it. He's like a dad to me, when Cora ended up leaving last year and they parted ways. I love Rafael Devers, and you can see the potential time and time again. But there's a certain part of him, there's a lack of focus, at least in the field. And especially when he starts struggling at the plate, it's like it all piles up on him. You can see it. He plays so loose when everything's going well. And you can see it right now. In the second game, he almost went deep right before we got on. And he, flexing at the plate. Unfortunately, I think Jake Cave ended up pulling it right up in front of the wall.
That was crazy.
Yeah, but he's one of those guys, like, when things are going well, you see it all click, and he's such a special hitter. And it blows my mind how quickly people have forgotten how crazy his bat was in 2019. And by the end of the year, how far his glove had come, even in terms of advanced metrics and different stuff like that. He was, looking like above average. And you're talking about an above average third baseman who can hit as well as any other third baseman in this league when he's going well. That's a weapon that any team would kill for. And that's not even talking about how young he still is.
I know he has so much of his career left at this point, and that's the most exciting part about it, is like this kid is still so incredibly young, and the development and progress he's already made. Like, imagine how good he's going to be like 2 or 3 years from now.
Exactly. And that's why the Red Sox are sitting there trying to figure out contract extensions and different stuff like that with these guys. You want someone like Rafael Devers in a Red Sox uniform for a long time. Yeah. And, conditioning wise, he's in much better shape this year. I think you made a great point earlier. I'm not going to hold what happened last year with his body coming in. There are so many guys who couldn't even get into a gym. You know what I mean? During those times. And he's in the right shape. Xander Bogaerts holds him accountable. We know how special that bond is too. Yeah. And I think we're the Red Sox. Exactly. And I think where the Red Sox are right now, this is a big year. They were looking to see, what is Rafael Devers going to be? Because there's a little bit of a roster crunch I think people aren't realizing coming up. You got Tristan Casas, who's the number one prospect in the system. He's going to probably start the year in Double-A. And if he keeps ascending like he is, he'll be knocking on the door. I think there's a very small chance that he could even make a little noise this year at the end. But my guess is it's probably next year still.
Next year, though, I mean.
Exactly. And you still have Bobby Delbeck, who's figuring things out this year. And there's the crowd who's moved Devers to first. You know what I mean? The crowd that wants to move Xander Bogaerts to third. So there's also
the crowd that wants to bring Michael Chavis back up and put Bobby Delbeck down.
Exactly. And, listen, for all the people that I like Michael Chavis, but
Yeah,
nobody can deny. Look at Christian Arroyo and what he's doing right now.
yeah,
Whatever Heim Bloom and Alex Cora continue to support him this spring. But everyone killed Heim Bloom for bringing him in last year. He's
yeah.
clicking. This looks like the former top prospect that was on every national list for years.
Yeah, this is the player that he brought in for him to be. This is the player that we wanted to see, and this is the player that I was like, okay, he brought him in for a reason. Like, once he really can click and get things going here and just really, really get his stuff going, I think this is going to be a really good player to have on this team, and he's making an impact. I mean, even today in that first game, he was looking really good. He had a couple solid hits in that game, and so I think having somebody like that on this team too is really, really, really is going to be really valuable down the road. And I think another thing that I like about this team is you do have a solid mix of veteran talent and the young players on this team. So you have the people like Xander Bogaerts, who's played through 2 championships with this team and has been around for a while. And then you have the players like Bobby Dalbec, who we just mentioned before, and even Alex Verdugo, who's still relatively new to this team. I think having that combination is really, really good because there's something special developing between those young players now and the veterans. And another thing I will say that I've noticed so far that I think was not really a concern per se, but more just I guess more of a question mark or just not knowing how that was going to go was the outfield defense before the season started, just because, that last group defensively were some of the best in the league. And then, Mookie's gone, and then they trade Andrew Benintendi and they don't re-sign JBJ. And so those 3 players are all gone. So then it's like, okay, so who do we really have in the outfield? Can we really rely on these players? But I think the outfield defensively so far has looked pretty good. Like, I mean, Renfroe made that weird catch today back there. And Franchy Cordero, I mean, a lot of people were giving Bloom a hard time for acquiring him in that Benintendi trade, but I really like what I've seen from him on both sides of the ball so far.
100%. And starting with that outfield defense, I understand people looking at it and being like, you're talking about Mookie Betts, who is one of the best right fielders we've ever seen defensively. JBJ, you could throw him right in that conversation as well. Andrew Benintendi, I think, had started to slide a little bit defensively, and
defensively too the last couple of years.
Exactly. And the Benny Biceps crew doesn't want to admit that. I understand. But he lost a little bit of speed. And unfortunately for a guy who was a center fielder when he was drafted and people had hoped he'd be someone who could play all 3 outfield positions, he wasn't that anymore. Bringing Alex Verdugo in and having that, or, him being here, second year in, seeing him play left, center, and right, just like, he did last year at times, not as much center, but left and right. Having that guy who can move around, the same with Hunter Renfroe, Marwin Gonzalez being able to go out there and left. There's just so many pieces they can kind of swap back and forth. And none of these guys are below average. I think sometimes you look in, I think Alex Verdugo is a little bit over his head sometimes in center. I think you could say the same for Hunter Renfroe, but they can get the job done. And that's the biggest thing, especially when you have someone like Jarren Duran, who's right on the brink of coming up. No one's going to be JBJ. You can't. If you're expecting to sit there and watch, we've already seen him do it with the Brewers this year, but him, climbing up the wall and doing stuff like that, it's impossible. But all you need is average defense there, and you can get by, especially when you have good defense in the corners. And that's where I think Franchy Cordero, Hunter Renfroe, Alex Verdugo all fit in really well, is because when you have one of those guys in the corner and the other in center, you're going to be fine. It's a good defense that works well together. And Franchy Cordero, the people who killed Heim Bloom for that trade, listen, he's not even the main part of that deal. It's just the truth. The main prospects are still coming back. And Cordero, I believe he has a 7-game hitting streak now. He's made a couple big catches out in left field. We saw in the Rays series. Put some respect on his name.
I mean, that's what I mean, though. I mean, like, I really like what I've seen from him, and I just can't believe that there were people that were like, why would we ever get him? Like, what's he going to do for this team? And so when, watching him play, I was like, wow, Bloom really had something going there, I think. And he knew kind of what he wanted to get out of that trade. And I was one of those people that wasn't really upset when they traded Benintendi because, I mean, he did digress on both sides of the ball the last couple of years after the World Series season in 2018. his hitting was just never really where it was at that season after that. And I wanted to give him chances. And again, 2020 is hard to gauge, but even in 2019, we were starting to see that digression then. So in terms of 2020 having a weight on that, I still think even if it was a full season last year, we might have still seen that digression because it had already started in 2019. So I don't necessarily, I'm not one of those people that was like, oh, why would we ever trade Benintendi? I think that was probably one of the better moves that he could have made in terms of what he had available, and considering kind of all of the factors and what he could have gotten out of it. I think that was one of the better moves he could have made.
100%. And, I look at Andrew Benintendi, and when you just look at, I understand, like anybody who watched that time and when he got drafted at 7 out of Arkansas, and you saw, this guy looked like someone who was going to be a perennial batting champ kind of player, 20 home run guy, get you 20 steals, and, be that year in and year out, just a really good player. Someone you can put near the top of your lineup. And we saw Alex Cora try him and, near the top of the lineup multiple times, and it never clicked. And when I look at Andrew Benintendi, unfortunately, he just didn't understand the ball player he wanted to be. There was a consistent push from him. And I was stunned to hear Alex Cora say this a couple of weeks ago. But him and his agent, they wanted something different for him, for what he would become than what the organization wanted. Benintendi wanted to join this home run, revolution and be, a 25, 30 home run guy and kind of lead the way with his bat. And unfortunately, the bat isn't good enough for that. He never developed the hitting tool the way he had hoped. And realistically, he's Robbie Grossman. He's a slightly better version of him. Yeah. And what did Robbie Grossman get on the market this year? 2 years and $10 million. You can find an average left fielder every single offseason. And for the Red Sox to go and get Franchi Cordero, who is exciting, he fits the roster and where they're at. No one's saying he's a superstar, but he's a very good player that you can plug in and he'll get the job done. We're talking about Josh Winkowski, who looked great during spring training. His stuff ticked up. Now he's kind of raising in the prospect rankings for the Red Sox. Chaim Bloom is a master at finding talent and picking these guys out of systems. Whether you want to talk about Connor Siebold, whose stuff has ticked up in a huge way over the past year, and Nick Pivetta, who
that was another one.
No one liked Nick Pivetta a year ago. But when Chaim Bloom made that deal immediately, and you don't see this with any trades, industry sources go, Chaim Bloom knows what he's doing, and he's continuing to get great deals done for them.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of fans I know had a problem with that too, because they were like, why would you get rid of Brandon Workman? Like, he's our most consistent reliever right now. But what he got out of that trade, we're seeing those effects now with the Connor Siebold's and the Nick Pavettas, those types of players. And I think you're right that finding talent is a strength of his. And he seems to know the types of players that he should be looking for to set this team up for success and who will fit in at Fenway Park and with this roster. And I think the Hunter Renfroe, that whole signing, I think was another example of that too, because I think he saw something in him that would work well at Fenway in particular. And I think that that's a big reason why they brought him in to this organization. And I actually don't disagree with that. I really think that with his hitting style, I think that Fenway's a good ballpark for him. And I think having somebody like that out there was kind of, I think, a little bit of an underrated move in terms of by the fan base that Bloom did, because I think a lot of people were just skeptical about why he would sign somebody like that.
Well, everyone wants, the big signings. They wanted, people were saying, I want George Springer. I want this. And when you look at where the Red Sox are in their competitive cycle and how the luxury tax works in baseball, which I don't think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand. And I'm not criticizing anyone. Like, I get if you don't want to get that deep into it. But unfortunately, baseball is a business and you got to make sense of the rules and the structures you play in. And that's why, a lot of people and, I said this on air on 98.5 a year ago, and it was the first thing that got a lot of buzz for me. I agreed with the Mookie Betts trade 110%. Just from the point of, if you want to follow the same path of the Dodgers and, be able to continue to supplement your roster with great prospects and then pick your spots when you're going to spend big money, which the Dodgers did when they got Mookie Betts. They said, listen, we have the prospects. We have the younger pieces there. We have a good core. Now's the time to go over the luxury tax and ball out. When you're the 2019 Red Sox and you have no depth and you can tell, yikes, this is going to be a mediocre team for the next 3 to 5 years, you have to make a move like that. And, going to Hunter Renfroe, I think Kiki Hernandez fits right there too. Both of
Yeah,
their hit
that's a cool
profiles.
lineup for
Yeah.
now.
You look at their hit profiles and where they hit home runs. They both, if they play, half their games in Fenway Park, those totals are going to skyrocket. And I think from both of them, we haven't really seen them hit their full stride yet, but I think both of them will be really solid players here. And that's the thing. Solid players aren't fun. I understand they're not fun, but solid players get the job done. And that's what Heim Bloom's all about.
Yeah, we've seen glimpses of both of them already. Like, we've seen glimpses from Hunter Renfroe, and we've seen glimpses from Kike Hernandez. And obviously, it's still early in the season. So I think once those two really find their stride, I mean, this lineup's going to be even more dangerous than it already is. I mean, and just with the season that JD's having, and it's incredible, really, to just see this. And like you said, having those solid players that you can rely on to get the job done a lot of times is really what you need. You don't need to spend crazy money on all of this amazing talent every year. And we saw that with Tampa Bay. I mean, last year they went to the World Series and they spent the amount of money they spent was significantly less than a lot of other teams, and they made it to the World Series because they have a good system in place where they develop a lot of these young prospects and bring them up so that they have the veteran talent that are playing well, but then they keep rebuilding their system and they keep bringing more players in that'll just constantly evolve into better players. And that's why the Rays, although they have people always joke I can't even name a lot of players on the Rays roster, it's because they keep doing this same thing every year where they really don't spend a lot of money, but they know how to find talent that can help them get the job done, and it helps them in crucial situations like going to the World Series and their pitching and everything. I mean, they have this young pitching talent, even still now to this day. This year, they have a couple of young pitchers that we're going to see probably have great careers too. And that's just how they do it. And I think the Red Sox were stuck at a place where after they won the World Series in 2018, they had spent so much money and then they didn't really have anybody under that to help them rebuild to kind of focus on the future. And I think when Heim came in, he was in a tough spot because he had to address a lot of things about this organization. And you can't just ignore the farm system at all and not try to rebuild that and not try to get some solid prospects that you could bring up to help with that. And I think now the Red Sox are at a better place where he's thinking about it more in terms of that Dodgers or Rays mentality where you want to constantly have players that are lined up that could come up and help get the job done. And I think Kike Hernandez, when he signed him, I actually was super excited because I know that a lot of Dodgers fans loved having him on that team as a locker room guy, especially just with his personality and his leadership skills, and just having that type of player in your locker room, I think is what a lot of Dodgers fans liked. And just the fact that he can really play anywhere. He's had so much experience playing all these different positions that, you can really sub him in anywhere if somebody needs an off day or something like that. And from a hitting standpoint, we've seen him when he really is on point be a really dangerous hitter too. I mean, he'd go on these hot streaks in LA and nobody wanted to face him during those times because he was just on a roll. And so if we get that Kike Hernandez for some of the season too, then I think that that'll prove to people that that was another solid signing by Heim.
Yeah, and you look at just last postseason, Kike Hernandez, even before last postseason, has had some big homers and big moments in the playoffs. Last year, he had one of the biggest moments, outside of the Tatis, bat flip home run we all remember.
Yeah.
That was one of the biggest moments of the postseason. And Kike Hernandez, he may not be super exciting, but Dodgers fans love this man. And the way I compare it, it reminds me of Brock Holt, but almost on steroids. How Red Sox fans looked at Brock Holt almost too much as this great, listen, he's a fine utility guy. He's barely hanging on these days. He's having a good start to the year with the Rangers though. But Kike Hernandez was a guy who just never really got a huge opportunity there because that roster is so flooded with talent.
Yeah.
And, I look at Kike Hernandez. I think he's the 9th ranked jersey sale in all of baseball right now. That's how much Dodgers fans love this guy. They were buying his jersey nonstop. And he's someone who just fits that roster and where the Red Sox are at. And from a clubhouse standpoint, too, I think really the biggest thing you can say about when they let Brock Holt go is they lost one of those voices in the clubhouse that everyone could connect with. You could joke around with, we all remember the Brock Holt moments in the dugout. We're already seeing those with Kike or with KK and like all of his different, dance moves and the different stuff he's doing. Like that's the fun stuff. And, on the other note with the Dodgers and, the Tampa Bay stuff, you think calling the Red Sox Tampa Bay North or Dodgers East is an insult? Those two teams were in the World Series last year.
Yeah,
like you want to talk about an insult?
Like when you're comparing us to the Rays, it's like, why would I ever think that that's insulting? Like that actually to me seems like a compliment.
Sorry, you called me one of the most forward-thinking teams in the sport. That's an insult to me. If you want the Red Sox to be a team that's great every single year and, has young talent you can get excited about, Chaim Bloom has been the way to do that. And I think the narrative is already starting to change on Chaim Bloom, but I've never seen a front office guy get as much hate, get bodied by everybody, whether it was sports talk radio, people outside. You go on Twitter, like nothing bothers me more than the people sitting watching MLB Network at 10:30 and they're like, oh man, like look at Mookie. It would be so fun. The Red Sox are having a great start to this year. They're 4th in run differential entering today. Yeah. Chill out. Chill, breathe. Mookie Betts is great. He's the number 2 player of this generation right now we're watching. But let me tell you, the number 1 player, Mike Trout, has sit in Los Angeles with the Angels with an organization that is backwards thinking, up until this past year, I'd say. But, over Mike Trout's career, extremely backwards thinking, that kind of Dave Dombrowski mindset, you can only go so far with that. And unless you want Mookie Betts to sit here and, continue to be great, post MVP caliber seasons and the Red Sox finish in 3rd place, that's what you were looking for. No, yeah. I don't want that. That's not worth anything. And it would have been fun to watch Mookie play out his career here, but I'll take a competitive Red Sox team year in and year out every single time.
Yeah, me too. And I think it was hard for people to see it from that perspective at the time when it happened, because they were like, oh, we're never going to get this type of talent again as Mookie. And obviously, Mookie's talent is pretty special. And obviously we're not taking that away from him. But at the same time, it was just he would have left eventually anyway, I think, because he did want to make a lot of money too. And I really think it was one of those situations where why just let him walk a player with that level of talent when you can actually actively go get something from him, from making a trade for him, like you can actually get something for that. And Alex Verdugo and Jeter Downs are both solid players that they got out of that trade. And so I think it's, at the end of the day, in terms of longer term, it sets the Red Sox up for better success now than if Mookie was still here, because they wouldn't have had as much of that depth that they have right now.
Legitimately, you just put it perfectly. That's exactly the whole situation here. And you look at, Alex Verdugo, who was, easily a top 50 prospect in baseball. We saw last year, I think it's hard to argue he was their best player, all around. And especially as the season went along, he seemed to get better and better. And this is coming off a stress fracture in his back. He wasn't even fully healthy yet. And we're not talking Jeter Downs, who Tristan Cassis may be the number 1 rated prospect amongst, a majority of outlets for the Red Sox. Keith Law has Jeter Downs as the number 1 prospect in the entire Red Sox system. I believe is a top 40 guy. So stuff like that, pay attention. And we haven't even mentioned Connor Wong, who was one of the standouts of spring training. When Jason Varitek is sitting here raving about a guy, Tech's not someone who talks a ton. So when he's like, this guy, there's something there, the way he communicates.
Yeah. If he says, of all people, says something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think he fits that modern blend of a catcher where he's athletic. He can do different things. He's not going to get back there and just be, kind of a wall that can't do too much. No, he's going to be able to hit for power. He may not be the best bat in the entire, he may not be Christian Vasquez at this point, right? Yeah. But if you're telling me you have a catcher who could hit 240 with 15 to 20 home runs and good defense, that's anybody will take that in baseball today. You're one of the upper tier catchers at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the whole situation here now is the Red Sox are in a much better place now than they were in terms of just having more of those options and having these players in the farm system now that in a year or two are probably going to be ready to come up and join this team and keep them competitive. And I think that Bloom coming in has really made a difference in that way because he's approaching it that way. And he's saying, okay, look, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here kind of from the ground up. And what can we do to make the most of what we have and continue to just build our system to a point where it's like teams like the Dodgers and Rays who are seeing success year after year. And, obviously they're not winning the World Series every single year like the Dodgers aren't, but they've won their division for like 9 years straight or something crazy like that. And so that's, that something's being done right in that organization. And I always go back to just the amount of depth and just the farm system that team has. And we're seeing it with the Red Sox now. And that's exciting because I think for the next few years to come and hopefully past that too, we can look at the Red Sox and say, this is going to be a team that's going to be tough, that's going to be out there competing with other teams. And this year, this is actually another thing that I wanted to touch on too, was they're in probably what is the toughest division in baseball right now. And I mean, so far this year, we're not really seeing that in terms of teams like the Yankees who are struggling right now. Tampa Bay is kind of playing average baseball right now. But I think as the season goes on, those teams are going to kind of be more competitive. And I think the division is going to get closer than it is right now. I mean, obviously, I love seeing the Red Sox and then everybody else, and I wish it would stay like that. But I just find it really hard to believe that you have the Yankees who are going to keep playing like this all season. I don't think that they have the pitching, the Yankees, to sustain them and go all the way this year. I really think it'd be in their best interest to make a move at the deadline to acquire a reliable pitcher that can go behind Garrett Cole, because outside of him, everybody else in that rotation is a question mark. And I said that before the season, too. I said outside of Garrett Cole, I don't really see any of your pitchers that I can confidently say right now is going to be super reliable, because they had so many question marks. And we're seeing the struggles now, and their offense hasn't fully clicked yet either. But I think once their offense clicks more, they'll probably start winning some more games. But, if the Red Sox continue to play like they're playing right now, where do you kind of see them in terms of the rest of the division, and where do you see them kind of stacking up like as the season progresses? Because to me, I see this as the type of situation where the Red Sox could definitely be a playoff team. I mean, I really don't think there's a doubt about that if they keep playing at the level that they're playing and the pitching continues to stay consistent. I do think that they can be a playoff team. It's just so hard to feel confident that they'll definitely win the division with how many good teams are in it.
Yeah, as vocal as I've been about the Red Sox being, a much better team, I'm still not really anywhere close to saying they could win this division. I still think the Yankees, even with the questions they have, I think they have enough depth to get by. That lineup is going to continue to be lethal. And I expect, I think Taillon's going to get a lot better as the year goes along. Corey Kluber, I think will be fine. He hasn't I'm not too excited about what I've seen, but that Yankees team, just from a talent standpoint, that bullpen still has, some pretty great arms, and Zach Britton will be back at some point, or in that late April, May area. I still think the Yankees just have a little too much talent for the Red Sox to overcome. But I think after the Yankees, I think the Blue Jays, the Red Sox, and the Rays are all in the same tier here. I look at the Blue Jays, and they have a lot of pitching reinforcements coming back right now. Robbie Ray just got back. Nate Pearson's right around the corner. And they have some really interesting arms, not only in the bullpen there, but, at their alternate training site. So I think that Blue Jays team is going to be a team that really hits their stride in the middle of the summer. Similar to how we saw last year, where they just surged in that last 30 games into the playoffs. And everyone was like, okay, now I see what's happening with this Blue Jays team. And you see Vlad Guerrero Jr. looks like the Vlad Guerrero Jr. everyone had hoped to see.
Yeah.
And Bo Bichette with his walk-off today, they're going to click.
That made me happy just watching that. Obviously as a Red Sox fan, I saw that walk-off and it was just perfect for me to see. But yeah, sorry, continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, but that Blue Jays team, there's just such a exciting feel to them. And I think a young team like that, yes, they've started a little bit slow, but I think it'll click once they get fully healthy. The Rays, as much as I do respect the Rays and everything they've done, I have a hard time getting as excited about them as I can the other teams when I look at the fact that, the Rays, while they have brought in so much to solidify their depth, there's just not a lot of depth there that I feel great about. Chris Archer has already gone down with an injury, and, Kevin Cash is saying, it looks like he's going to be okay. But anytime you tell me there's a forearm problem there, I'm going to be cautious, especially with a guy in Chris Archer who hasn't been himself in, we're talking 4 years here, right? And I think you go beyond that, look at their bullpen. You really want to make fun of the 2020 Red Sox. Chris Mazza, Jeffrey Springs, and Colin McHugh. They're all sitting in that Rays bullpen right now, So
Yeah,
listen, the Rays can fix guys, but they can't fix everybody. That's just being realistic here, right? And we know Colin McHugh never ended up actually playing a game for the Red Sox. But when you have a couple of the cast-offs from the bullpen last year, the Red Sox bullpen slash guys they had to use to start, I have a hard time buying into that. Michael Wacha hasn't impressed me. Really, Tyler Glasnow has even surpassed my expectations. He's finally going deeper into games, which was a real concern I had. I think it's one of the reasons the Rays didn't end up winning the World Series last year. Glasnow just couldn't give you that ace-like performance against, upper tier talent. They drew too many walks against them. So right now, I think it's something like the Yankees, the Red Sox, and Blue Jays are kind of fighting, I think, for 2 and 3. I have the Rays going 4, and I have the Orioles in last, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too concerned about the Orioles. I mean, I still can't believe that they swept the Red Sox in that first series. Like nobody saw really.
That's baseball for you.
But I know, but people jumped right on that immediately, like, oh, yep, the Red Sox stink. Like, I was like, since when is the baseball season only 3 games? I didn't realize that it got that much shorter. I obviously didn't get the memo on that. And then the way that obviously they bounced back since then. But I'm on board with you on this. I do think that the Yankees, once they turn it around, should win the AL East. I think that, and even Severino, who has, once he comes back too, I think that they're going to be. He's another one. I think make a difference to that rotation. I think health obviously is going to be a big thing for them because that's always an issue for the Yankees. I think their lineup still is, we kind of see the same narrative still with them about just strikeout or home run and pretty much nothing in between. I think they have too many of those types of hitters still in their lineup now. Players like Aaron Judge and, even Stanton, who it just strikes out a lot. And I think that that's an issue with a lot of their lineup. So I still see the Yankees right now as not a team that can win the World Series, but I do see them as a team that can win the division. And I think that it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a runaway for the Yankees, though. I think it's going to be close. Still, I think that it's going to be fun to watch all 4 of those teams. I think it's going to be a close race, even at the end of the season. But I do think the Yankees finish in first, and then everything else from there between the Rays, Red Sox, and Blue Jays, I think it's anyone's game at that point after that, and just excluding Baltimore. I think that the Red Sox can be right there with those teams. And I think if they can rack up some key wins in the division, like they did with just sweeping the Rays, if they can stay ahead of these series when they play teams like the Blue Jays and the Rays all year, I think those types of series are going to make a big difference in terms of those division results at the end. Like if they can compete and, take 2 of 3 for a lot of series they play against teams like the Blue Jays and the Rays the rest of the season, I think that those are going to be the games that might make the biggest difference when it comes to those standings.
I agree. And I think that's why the Red Sox starting the season so strong is important, because I do think ultimately they're going to hit a little bit of a wall with the pitching staff once they get to that, those dog days of summer. Eventually guys are going to go on the IL. It's just part of it. I'd be shocked if Evaldi doesn't need an IL stint. I'd be shocked if Eduardo Rodriguez doesn't at some point. Outside of 2019, we all know Erod and some of the health struggles he had, before everything happened with myocarditis and everything. Stuff happens in baseball. It's just part of the game. I think the Yankees too, you look at some of their pitching depth, Davy Garcia is still there. We'll see what ends up happening with Clark Schmidt. He's dealing with some stuff, but if he ends up getting healthy, he's another reinforcement. Domingo Germán, trash dude, but he's a guy who can pitch, right? And we all know he struggled to start this year. And if he figures it out and he turns into what he was before all this stuff happens, he's another weapon for that Yankees rotation right there. And listen, if the Yankees are close come the trade deadline, they're going to make a move for somebody. There's someone who will bring in another pitcher. And I think Taillon's going to take a step. I really do believe it. I think he's going to turn into a really good mid-rotation arm for them. But yeah, I agree. And I think right now when you look at it, listen, with the Orioles, you get swept the first 3 games of the season. Let me tell you, my mentions were destroyed. It was so bad. Every person that had seen a tweet, I don't know if you've seen this Twitter account, but there's a Say No to Red Sox Propaganda account that feels that it's the worst. They find a way. Every time you tweet something positive, they have a negative spin on it. I haven't seen them too much lately, unfortunately. But everyone was crying. Listen, the Orioles played a great series and the Red Sox bats were cold. The Red Sox bats will go cold for a stretch again. It's baseball. It's just part of it. John Means looked so nasty. It wasn't even funny on opening day.
Yeah, he's some good stuff. I think he's underrated.
Yeah, 100%. And you look, besides Garrett Richards, and the pitching was good. That's the constant variable we're talking about, to kind of bring it full circle here. That pitching, as long as it's consistent, even, there'll be games when the bats go cold and they can't make up for it, right? But if a majority of the time the pitching is good, this Red Sox lineup is going to find a way to keep them in games, to win them games. And I think that's why at the end of the year, we'll be looking at them and saying, no, they're fighting for a wild card spot.
Yeah. And I'll be looking at all those people that tried to tell me the Red Sox were going to be really bad this year and being like, so where's my apology for
flex on them. Just flex on them.
For you giving me crap for saying the Red Sox were going to be a bad team this year, because I liked what I saw. I liked what was happening in the offseason, and then I also liked what I saw in spring training, because I said a lot, like they look like they already, the bats were on fire during spring training. So I was like, this is a good sign for the season. I was like, this is going to be, I think this could be a good year. And then obviously, the bats were just cold when they played the Orioles, and that happens. I mean, every team goes through periods where they're cold. And that's another thing about the 60-game season last year that bothered me, was because teams could just be, you could have like an 8-game losing streak or something because you're just in a slump, but that you can't really recover from that in a 60-game season. Whereas in a regular length season, you can go on a slump like that, but come back and still be fine. And so I think that that's another reason why them starting off so strong is so important, because then if they do have this comfortable lead in their division, then if they do drop a few games in a row, they'll still be right there in the mix. And so I think that this is huge, the way that they're on this tear right now, and they're super fun to watch. And I'm excited to see how the rest of the season goes.
Exactly. Like, you couldn't have put it better. And I think by the end of the year, people will look at this Red Sox team, and while they may not be the most talented team, we've ever seen or reached the highest heights, they'll be a team people look at and they're like, oh, wow, the next era of the Red Sox kicked off in 2021. Like, by the end of the year, I think you'll look and be like, wow, this team, they're 2 pieces away, 1 or 2, solid pieces, but a good offseason, and this team's going to be competing right there, at the top of the division with a team like the Yankees, with the Blue Jays, who are likely to take another step forward after this year as well. And listen, the rumors are already going. People are saying the Red Sox are looking at some of the big time shortstops. I know Red Sox Stats has floated that a couple different times, and we've seen some sources. Like, there's a lot of craziness on the horizon. I think 2021 will tell them who are the guys who are part of the future, who are going to be part of that next championship core. And watching that develop, watching these young guys become, some are going to become stars. Some guys are going to become, all right, you're going to be dealt, and sometimes I see Bobby Dell back as one of those guys, just to put a name like out there for that. But, some of these guys are going to make their names here and become fan favorites for years. And other guys will be pieces that help make this team take that next level, or take that next level, that next step, in 2022 and in the years that follow.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that that's why they're in such a good place right now, because there's so much they can do from here, and so many people that they can move around to make them even better and even more competitive. And I think that that was one of the goals that Bloom had, was now he has a lot of pieces here that they're already playing well together, but that he can move some of those pieces around down the road and get even better players that can continue to make them even better and more competitive than they are now. So I think in terms of the future perspective, he did a really, really good job with this offseason and utilizing what he had, and just acquiring a lot of good players that can set them up for future success. And I think after this season, like you said, this is going to be kind of an eye-opener for a lot of people that are going to be like, well, this Red Sox team is in good shape.
Yeah, this team's as flexible as any organization in baseball right now. And ultimately, flexibility is one of the most important things any team can have. The Dodgers had it for years, which allowed them to do different things, to experiment and, bring certain guys in and still infuse their roster with young talent. You need flexibility, and that's what these Red Sox rosters didn't have at all under Dave Dombrowski. And listen, flags fly forever. Dave Dombrowski got the job done, but it came with a cost. And unfortunately, that cost, Dave Dombrowski couldn't fit the bill. He couldn't pay it when that time came. He didn't have the skills to build up a farm system like that. Chaim Bloom, that's what he's made his career off of. Whether it's with the Rays, whether you want to connect it all the way to the Dodgers and Andrew Friedman when he was with the Rays himself. These guys all come from the same kind of cloth. And when you realize it and you look back and you hear, oh, well, when the Red Sox were looking for someone to lead their front office, they had their eyes set on Chaim Bloom. This is why. This is exactly why. And a lot of people who don't look that deep into the game aren't going to see that. But trust me, it's coming. And within a year or two, people will look at Chaim Bloom and be like, I hope this guy's leading this front office. I don't want him to ever go. And I think he's going to be seen, listen, I'm not going to say he's going to be Theo Epstein. That's ridiculous. Theo, there's only one Theo, right?
Right, there's nobody like him.
Exactly. But I envision that kind of forward thinking, that kind of groundbreaking, ability to build rosters year in and year out. I think Chaim Bloom has a chance to do something very similar.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And that's why I'm so excited for the future of this team and just to see where this goes. And I think that a lot of people that were just hating on Bloom are already starting to change their tune. And by the end of the season, we'll be on board with Bloom being here. And we're going to see those types of people that really were making it vocal how they felt about him before have completely different opinion on him at the end of this season. So it's great to see them doing so well. I think this upcoming series this weekend against the White Sox is going to be fun because that's a good team this year too. So that should be fun. I'm trying to go to one of those games actually, which should be fun. But,
can't blame you one bit.
Yeah, so I've been dying to get to a game because it's been so long since we couldn't go last year. But so it'll be fun. It'll be interesting to see that series and just how things go from here and just what we do for the rest of the 2021 season.
Hell yeah. Listen, I drove by Fenway the other day. I was in Boston and, just driving by and looking, I was like, wow, it's been so long. You know what I mean? Just getting to go into the ballpark, have a nice chill night, watch a game. And, I'm so happy fans are back. And that's another thing with this Red Sox team. You can see they're feeding off fans. When you have guys like Alex Verdugo and Kike Hernandez, Martin Perez, that's all they continue to reference. And nothing better than fans back in the ballpark. Last year never felt like real baseball until really the postseason. This year, it feels like real baseball.
Exactly. And it's so refreshing. And it's just a representation that we're really moving in the right direction here with all of this. So with this, the craziness and this past year and just, it's great to see all of that happen and just happy we have baseball back. And I really appreciate you joining the show. And we had a great conversation and I'm sure everyone else can agree with that. Good luck to you with everything. I'm sure I'll try to get you back on the show at some point too, as we watch this Red Sox team and how they go through the rest of their season. Everybody, I always appreciate you tuning in every week. Definitely couldn't do the show without any of you. So it means a lot to me that people constantly tune in. You know where to find the show. It's on all podcast streaming platforms and social media platforms. It has a YouTube channel, and you can follow Tyler on Twitter. He has really good Red Sox posts during games. So I would definitely recommend that as well. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your week and weekend, and I'll talk to you all next time. Have a great night, everybody.